Supreme Court vacancy, economic uncertainty, and racial injustice dominating this election. Final voting is just 19 days away. Tonight, voters in a key battleground state put their questions directly to former Vice President Joe Biden. Can he seize the moment and secure their vote? Live from the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, this special edition of 2020, The Vice President and the People. Now reporting, Chief Anchor George Stephanopoulos.
And welcome to our town hall with Joe Biden. Mr. Vice President, welcome to you.
Good to be with you.
We're here with a group of Pennsylvania voters. You can see they're all appropriately socially distanced tonight. And they're a group of, some are voting for you, some have said they're voting for President Trump, some are still undecided. And we're going to try to take questions from as many of them as we can tonight. And we're going to start with Nicholas Fedden. He's from Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. That's close to here in Philadelphia. And you're a Democrat.
I am a Democrat. Thank you, George. Mr. Vice President, every day my wife and I are in disbelief at the lack of coordinated federal action on COVID-19. We know that your administration would follow the science. My question for you is two parts. First, looking backwards to when this country first became aware of COVID-19, what would following the science have meant in terms of actual policy? And then, looking forward, what would your administration do in terms of following the science with real concrete policies that haven't been done by the current administration?
Well, first of all, going back, the fact is that the president was informed how dangerous this virus was. And all the way back in the beginning of February, I argued that we should be keeping people in China. And we had set up in our administration a pandemic office within the White House. There were 44 people on the ground. I suggested we should be seeking, and I didn't hold public office. I was a former vice president. I suggested we, in fact, ask to have access to the source of the problem. And to the best of our knowledge, Trump never pushed that. All those 44 people came home, never got replaced. In addition to that, I pointed out that I thought in February, I did a piece for USA Today saying, this is a serious problem. Trump denied it. He said it wasn't. We later learned that he knew full well how serious it was when he did an interview with Bob Woodward. And at the time, he said he didn't tell anybody because he was afraid Americans would panic. Americans don't panic. He panicked. He didn't say a word to anybody. Then I wrote a piece in March about what I thought we should be doing to take hold of this, using there's an act that passed a long time ago that allows the president to go into a business and say, stop making this and start making that. And it took a long time for him to even institute that, to get ventilators and so on. And so the point was, he missed enormous opportunities and kept saying things that weren't true. It's going to go away by Easter. Don't worry about it. It's going to all, when the summer comes, it's all going to go away like a miracle. He's still saying those things.
Before you go to the future, can I follow up on looking backward just a little bit? You did have an op-ed in January where you warned of the seriousness of the pandemic, but there's no record of you calling for social distancing, limited social gatherings, mandatory masks.
Not back then.
In January, February.
No, in January, February. No, that's correct. There wasn't. That came at the end of March, and then I laid out a detailed plan relative to school openings in June and July. And I talked about, by that time, the science was becoming clearer and clearer of how this was spreading so rapidly. But the president kept denying that. If you notice, from March on, I stopped doing big meetings. I started wearing masks. So it was at a time when the science was saying, and his key people, Dr. Fauci, were saying, you should be taking these precautions. So what we should be doing now, there should be a national standard instead of leaving this up. Remember what the president said to the governors. Well, they're on their own. That's not my responsibility. The governors can do what they need to do, not my responsibility. It is the presidential responsibility to lead. And he didn't do that. He didn't talk about what needed to be done because he kept worrying, in my view, about the stock market. He worried if he talked about how bad this could be unless we took these precautionary actions, then in fact the market would go down. And his barometer of success to the economy is the market. Thirdly, what we didn't do is the president had an opportunity to open and allow schools and businesses to stay open if they got the kind of help they needed. So the Congress passed a couple $2 trillion worth of help, and what happened was most of that money, significant portion of that money, went to the very wealthiest corporations in the country, didn't get to the mom and pop stores. So you had 1 in 5, 1 in 6 minority businesses closing, many of them permanently, people being laid off. And then what happened was when the first tranche of the first round of money for unemployment, enhanced unemployment, went by, he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. And to the best of my knowledge, and I mean this sincerely, I can't think, I've been around for a lot of presidents, and you know a lot of presidents in a crisis. I don't ever remember one never calling the House and Senate, Republicans, Democrats together.
Let's look forward a little bit. You said that you would lock down the economy only if the scientists said it was necessary.
Well, by the way, that wasn't the context. They said, well, I lock down the economy if science said so. I said I'd follow science. But I don't think there's a need to lock down.
But I want to press you on that point.
Sure.
You've been in the Oval Office for 8 years with President Obama. He would always say that only the hard to solve problems get to his desk. What is most likely to happen is the scientists will disagree. The scientists will disagree with the economists. So the question is, how are you going to decide this? Who are you going to listen to? And how can you contain the pandemic without crushing the economy?
Well, you can contain the pandemic by being rational and not trust the economy. For example, I laid out a plan how you can open businesses. You can open businesses and schools if, in fact, you provide them the guidance that they need as well as the money to be able to do it. What's happening now is we know, for example, if you can open a business and you could have a sign on the door saying safe to come in, that's why people aren't going anyway even when they're open, and say because you have social distancing, you have plastic barriers, when you go to the cashier, you have separators between the booths, you don't have large crowds, you reduce the size, the number of people you can have in the restaurant, you make sure there's testing, that's a really critical piece that he didn't do, testing and tracing, and you make sure that people are equipped, going to schools. You know, we initially said, the government initially said they're going to provide masks for every student and every teacher. Then they said, no. FEMA said, the president or whomever said, no, that's not a national emergency. Not a national emergency. We need more teachers in our schools to be able to open smaller pods. We need ventilation systems changed. There's a lot of things we know now. And I laid them out in some detail. Now, again, when I say I laid them out, I'm not an office holder. I'm running for office. It's not like I'm still vice president or I was a United States senator pushing this. So I don't want to say I. But we did lay out exactly what needed to be done. And take a look. We make up 4% of the world's population. We have 20% of the world's deaths. We're in a situation where we have 210+ thousand people dead. And what's he doing? Nothing. He's still not wearing masks and so on.
We're getting some other questions on COVID.
Sure.
The next one comes from Kelly Lee. She's from Philadelphia.
Thank you.
Republican. Voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Undecided now?
Hey, Kelly, how are you?
Hi, Mr. Biden. My question is about the coronavirus vaccine,
Yes.
or potential. Senator Harris stated that she absolutely would not take a vaccine from President Trump. And of course, we all know it's not President Trump that would create this vaccine. It would be doctors and scientists that presumably we all trust. So my question for you is, if a vaccine were approved between now and the end of the year, would you take it? And if you were to become president, would you mandate that everyone has to take it?
Two things. Number one, President Trump talks about things that just aren't accurate about everything from vaccines, we're going to have one right away, it's going to happen, and so on. The point is that if the body of scientists say that this is what is ready to be done, and it's been tested, it's gone through the 3 phases, yes, I would take it, I'd encourage people to take it. But President Trump says things like, everything from this crazy stuff he's walking away from now, inject bleach in your arm, and that's going to work. I'm not being facetious. I mean, he actually said these things. And now Regeneron is the answer. That's going to cure everything. There's 500,000 doses. We got a couple, we have more than a few million people. And most of if you notice, most of the companies who are developing these vaccines are working, they're making real progress. I meet with 4 leading scientists at least twice a week in the beginning, 4 times a week, giving us the detail on what kind of progress is being made. And right now, they do the right thing. When they run into a serious problem, they halt the test. They don't continue until they figure out what the problem was. They're not there yet. And the most scientists say there's not likely to have a vaccine that would be available until the beginning of next year, into the spring of next year. And in the meantime, what I worry about is the same thing with Regeneron, which is a useful antidote, not antidote, a useful tool. But what's happening is there is no plan to figure out how to distribute it. How many, we had 500,000, vials of it. Well, we don't have all the testing equipment. We don't have all the ability to get it to the people who need it. And what we should be doing now, and allegedly it's happening, but I've not seen it yet, nor the docs that I've talked to seen it, there should be a plan when we have the vaccine. How do we distribute it?
And once we get it, if it's safe, if it's effective, will you mandate its use?
The answer is depending on how clear. There's vaccines, they say, have a very positive impact, and they're going to affect positively 85% of the American public. Or there's others say this vaccine is really the key. This is the golden key. It depends on the state of the nature of the vaccine, when it comes out, and how it's being distributed. That would depend on. But I would think that we should be talking about, depending on the continuation of the spread of the virus, we should be thinking about making it mandatory.
How could you enforce that?
Well, you couldn't. That's the problem. Just like you can't enforce measles. You can't come to school unless you have a measles shot. You can't. But you can't say everyone has to do this. But you would, just like you can't mandate a mask. But you can say, you can go to every governor and get them all in a room, all 50 of them as president, and say, ask people to wear the mask. Everybody knows.
And if they don't?
And they don't. No, not fine. Then I go to every governor, I go to every mayor, I go to every councilman, I go to every local official. Say, mandate the mask. Say, this is what you have to do when you're out. Make sure you encourage it being done. Look, George, you and I know, and I think you do too as well, the words of a president matter.
Absolutely.
No matter whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, they matter. And when a president doesn't wear a mask or makes fun of folks like me when I was wearing a mask for a long time, then people say, well, it mustn't be that important. But when a president says, I think this is very important, for example, I walked in here with this mask, but I have one of the N95 masks underneath it. I left it in my dressing room, the room I was in before I got here. And so I think it matters what we say. And we're now learning that children are getting the virus, not with as serious consequences. But there's been no studies done yet on vaccines for children. So there's a long way to go, but we can make progress in the meantime and save lives. And the last point I'll make, if you listen to the head of the CDC, he stood up and he said, while we're waiting for a vaccine, and he held up a mask. You wear this mask, you'll save more lives between now and the end of the year than if we had a vaccine. It's estimated by every major study done, from the University of Washington to Columbia, that if in fact we wore masks, we could save between now and the end of the year 100,000 lives.
And avoid lockdowns?
And avoid lockdown, yes. You don't have to lock down if you're wearing the mask.
Let's get a question on the economy. Anthony Argyrakis.
Thank you. Hope I answered your question.
From Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. It's a suburb of Pittsburgh, Republican.
I know it.
For President Trump.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. You stated that anyone making less than $400,000 will not see one single penny of their taxes raised.
That's right.
But also state that you are going to eliminate the Trump tax cuts. The Trump tax cuts reduces taxes for the majority of workers. I would argue not enough. What is your plan for either extending the tax cuts for the middle class or creating a new plan that further reduces those taxes?
I carry this card with me. When I said the Trump tax cuts, about 1.3 trillion of the $2 trillion in his tax cuts went to the top 1/10 of 1%. That's what I'm talking about eliminating, not all the tax cuts that are out there. And by the way, if you just take a look, we reduced the corporate tax rate from 35%, and Democrats and Republicans who were in office thought it should come down to 28%. He reduced it to 21%. You have 91 out of every of the Fortune 500 companies not paying a single solitary penny. If If you raise the corporate tax just back to 28%, which is a fair tax, you'd raise $1,300,000,000,000 by that one act. If you made sure that people making over 400 grand paid what they did in the Bush administration, 39.6%, you would raise another, as goes up to, let me get the exact number here, about another $92 billion. So you can raise a lot of money to be able to invest in things that can make your life easier, make you change your standard of living by making sure you have affordable health care, by making sure you're in a situation where you're able to send your kid to school. If you have a student debt, you can deal with it. Making sure that your home, you can pay your mortgage. You got 20 million people right now.
Mr. Vice President, let me press you on that, though.
Sure.
You're going to raise the corporate tax. You're going to raise taxes on the wealthy. Is it wise to do even that when the economy is as weak as it is right now? Another
Absolutely.
900,000 people.
That's a great question. Moody's did an analysis of my detailed analysis of my tax plan and my economic plan. They said, I will in 4 years, Moody's, Wall Street, said I will create 18.6 million new jobs, good paying jobs, number one. Number two, and I'll increase, the GDP will grow by $1 trillion more than would under Trump, and 7 million more jobs than under Trump. And the reason is when you allow people to get back in the game and have a job, everything moves. Everything moves. Right now you got the opposite. You had last year, during this pandemic, you had the wealthiest billionaires in the world, in the nation. They made another $700 billion. $700 billion. He talks about a V-shaped recovery. It's a K-shaped recovery. If you're on the top, you're going to do very well. And the other thing and if you're in the bottom, or you're in the middle or the bottom, your income is coming down. You're not getting a raise. I don't know what you do. You may get a raise. Hope you're a billionaire. But all kidding aside, but it's about growing the economy. And George, the way out, the reason why I'm so optimistic about economic recovery, more than I've ever been, is we have these 4 crises happening all at once, and one helps the other. For example, we're going to invest a great deal of that money into infrastructure, and into a green infrastructure. We're going to put 500,000 charging stations on new highways we're building and old highways we're building. We're going to own the electric market. You know as well as I do from your days, in the old days, where the president spends about $600 billion a year on government contracts. Everything from making sure they have aircraft carriers to automobile fleets for in the United States. If you make and it's not a violation of any international trade agreement, made in America. If you actually insist that whatever that product is, made in America, including the material that goes into the product, it's estimated we're going to create somewhere between another 4 and 6 million jobs just by doing that. But what's happening now? Under his trade policy, a lot of this is going overseas. You get a benefit from going overseas if you have much of it being made overseas. So if you send it overseas, you get a 10% tax increase on the product. If you make it in America and you bring it back, you get a 10% growth. If you bring back a company and you're going to open up an old facility, you get a 10% tax credit for all you invested. That actually works, George.
So there's not going to be any delay on the tax increases?
No, well, I got to get the votes. That's why, the one thing that I have this strange notion. We are a democracy. Some of my Republican friends and some of my Democratic friends even occasionally say, well, if you can't get the votes by executive order, you're going to do something. Things you can't do by executive order unless you're a dictator. We're a democracy. We need consensus.
Got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
I hope I answered your question.
We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. This special edition of 2020 will return in a moment.
access to the internet equals opportunity. And now that T-Mobile has merged with Sprint, we're using our new scale to make a difference. With the expanded capacity of our network, we're launching the most ambitious program in our history, Project 10 Million. We've committed to help close the homework gap by offering school districts free internet access and mobile hotspots for 10 million eligible households over the next 5 years, from the inner city to small towns all across America. Because access to opportunity begins with having access. T-Mobile, working to connect every student.
Colgate Optic White Renewal removes 10 years of yellow stains. That's like all the way back to 2010.
What's that? It's a shake weight. It's a wakey shake.
Remove 10 years of yellow stains with Colgate Optic White Renewal. For skin as alive as you are, don't settle for silver. Gold Bond. Champion your skin.
Introducing Slices and Sticks. 4 slices of pepperoni pizza together with 8 Italian cheese sticks. A combination as unexpected as the Saxa telephone.
Hey, Mom.
New Slices and Sticks, just $6.
Pizza, pizza.
Asthma symptoms can attack anywhere. Get fast relief here with Primatene Mist. FDA approved and available over the counter for mild asthma. It works quickly to restore free breathing. Primatene Mist. Breathe easy again.
Right now, people are going through really hard times.
My dad would have been so proud to see me here today. Shark Tank's back in business.
Streets here are still paved with gold.
Shark Tank season premiere Friday on ABC.
On your card, get set, go!
Sunday games are back on ABC. First, the classic game show returns. Leslie Jones hosts.
I love giving away money, especially when it ain't mine.
Then, a new season of Millionaire begins, and for the first time, a star wins it all.
You just won $1 million.
And the premiere of Card Sharks.
If you want to win big, you have to bet big.
Get your game on Sunday on ABC.
The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. From the Constitution Center in Philadelphia, here again, George Stephanopoulos.
And welcome back to our town hall with Joe Biden. We're going to get a question now from Cedric Humphrey. He's a student from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, progressive Democrat.
Don't jump, Cedric. You look like you're way up there.
Okay, thank you, George. And good evening, former Vice President Biden. Many people believe that the true swing demographic in this election will be black voters under the age of 30. Not because they'll be voting for Trump, but because they won't vote at all. I myself have had this exact same conflict. So my question for you then is, besides you ain't black, what do you have to say to young black voters who see voting for you as further participation in a system that continually fails to protect them?
Well, I say, first of all, as my buddy John Lewis said, it's a sacred opportunity and right to vote. It can make a difference. If young black women and men vote, you can determine the outcome of this election. Not a joke. You can do that. And the next question is, am I worthy of your vote? Can I earn your vote? And the answer is, there's 2 things I think that I care, and I've demonstrated I care about my whole career. One is, in addition to dealing with a criminal justice system to make it fair and make it more decent, we have to be able to put black Americans in a position to be able to gain wealth, generate wealth. And so you look at what that entails. It entails everything from early education. That's why I'm supporting making sure that we, Title I schools, as you know, schools with the least tax base to be able to support their schools. I increased the funding for them from 15 to $45 billion. That allows every teacher in that school to make up to $60,000 bucks. And the problem now is they're leaving the schools. They're not there. We're short about 1.5 million teachers, 1.25 million teachers. Number two, every 3 and 4 and 5-year-old will go to school, not daycare, school. And what all the great universities, including the one you've gone to, go to or went to, in fact, talks about in the last 8 years, what's happened. What happens when you let them go to school, they make up rapidly whatever shortcoming they had in terms of their education prior to that. They have not heard as many words spoken, et cetera, et cetera. What happens is that the studies show that 58% will increase by 58% their chance of going all through 12 years of school and going through successfully. We'll also provide for the ability to bring in social workers and school psychologists. We have one school psychologist in America now for every 1,507 kids. It should be 1 to 500, not just in schools that are poor, but in all schools. Because we learned that, for example, drug abuse doesn't cause mental illness. Mental illness causes drug abuse, the failure to get hold of people and deal with their anxieties. In addition to that, I provide for $70 billion for HBCUs for them to be able to have the wherewithal to do what other universities can do because they don't have the kind of foundational support they need. And so that would allow them, for example, like we did in our administration, the president allowed me to go down and we awarded a cybersecurity laboratory, ability to compete for a cybersecurity laboratory. The federal government spends billions of dollars a year on universities because they're the best kept secret or where most of the major inventions come out of. And so that school now will be able to produce young black women and men who are going to go into a field of the future that's burgeoning, cybersecurity. And that's what's going to help a great deal. In addition to that, if you're a young man about to graduate or you graduated from school and you want to own your first home, well, it's awful hard to get the money, depending on the background, what your economic background is, to get a down payment. So we're going to guarantee first-term home buyers a $15,000 down payment for first-term home buyers. In addition to that, what all the studies now show, and I've been arguing this for a long time, is young black entrepreneurs are just as successful as white entrepreneurs or anyone else, given a shot. But you can't get the money. Where do you go to get the startup money? So what President Obama and I did, we had a program where we took $1.5 billion and we invested it in all the SBAs around the country, in the state SBAs, Small Business Associations, and that generated $30 billion came off the sideline, because if you have a guarantee of $200,000 for your new startup enterprise, young entrepreneur, you're going to be able to attract, if it's government money as a guarantee, you'll be able to attract another $100,000. It generated $30 billion. Well, I'm changing that program, and I'll get this done without much trouble, I believe, in the Congress, from $1.5 billion to $30 billion to $30 billion. That'll take $300 billion off the sideline and grow, because and for example, if you, in fact, and I were the same age and we split our differences and we were the same age, and we went to the same builder to buy us each the same home, but my home was in a white neighborhood on one side of a highway and yours is in a black neighborhood, same exact home, your home will start off being valued 29% less than my home. Yet your insurance for that home will be higher. You'll be taxed more for it. We've got to end this. That's what got me involved in politics in the first place, a thing called redlining. We can change so much, that we can do so much to change the circumstances to give people a real opportunity.
Cedric, did you hear what you needed?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, do you hear what you needed to hear?
I think so.
Okay.
Well, there's a lot more. If you're going to hang around afterwards, I'll tell you more.
Okay.
No, but I really mean it. It is the key. Look, this is the way every other. How do most, like my dad, he lost his job up in Scranton, and it took him 3 years to be able to move down to Delaware, to Claymont, Delaware, steel town, and send us home to our grandpa to live with him. We finally got back. We lived in apartments, became 6 and 8 housing much later. It was normal apartments. But it took him 5 years to be able to buy a home. Well, we bought a 3-bedroom home with 4 kids and a grandpapa living with us, but it accumulated wealth. You build up wealth. That's how middle-class folks make it. They build up wealth. Then he was able to borrow a little against that to be able to help us to get to school, those kinds of things. It's about accumulating wealth. And you're behind an 8 ball. The vast majority of people of color are behind an 8 ball. And it's the same way what's going on now with all this money that's been voted. What's happened? You go to the bank, if you're a black businessman, and the president fired the only inspector general to oversee all this help coming from the Congress. And what happens? You go in and they say, do you have an account here? No. Do you have a credit card? This? No. Have you borrowed from us before? No. We bail these suckers out. They're not liable for any of the money, but they still won't lend it. They still won't lend it to you. We got to change that. It's about accumulating wealth.
Want to get another question in here from Angelica Portalis? No, not at all. Garnet Valley, Pennsylvania, Republican who voted for President Trump last time.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Vice President Biden. Nice to meet you. What's your view on the crime bill that you wrote in 1994, which showed prejudice against minorities? Where do you stand today on that?
Well, first of all, things have changed drastically. That crime bill went and voted. The Black Caucus voted for it. Every black mayor supported it across the board. And the crime bill itself did not have mandatory sentences except for 2 things. It had 3 strikes and you're out, which I voted against in the crime bill, but it had a lot of other things in it that turned out to be both bad and good. I wrote the Violence Against Women Act. That was part of it. The assault weapons ban and other things that were good. What I was against was giving states more money for prison systems that they could build, state prison systems. And you have 93 out of every 100 people in jail now is in a state prison, not in a federal prison, because they built more prisons. I also wrote into that bill a thing called drug courts. I don't believe anybody should be going to jail for drug use. They should be going into mandatory rehabilitation. We should be building rehab centers to have these people housed. We should decriminalize marijuana, wipe out the record so you can actually say in honesty, you ever been arrested for anything? You can say no, because we're going to pass a law saying there is no background that you have to reveal relative to the use of marijuana. And so there's a lot of things, but in addition to that, we got to change the system. I joined with a group of people in the House to provide for changing the system from punishment to rehabilitation. Along with a guy named Marlon Spector, who you may remember, I wrote the Second Chance Act.
In the meantime, an awful lot of people were jailed for minor drug crimes after the
Exactly right.
Was it a mistake to support it?
Yes, it was. But here's where the mistake came. The mistake came in terms of what the states did locally. What we did federally, we said it was about, and you remember, George, it was all about the same time for the same crime. What I had done as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, took the 10 Circuit Courts of Appeals, took some really brilliant lawyers working for me in Judiciary. We did a study, and we determined what happens if, for the first, second, third offense, for any crime in the criminal justice system, at the federal level, if you're a black man, it's the first time you committed robbery. How long would you go to jail on average? If you're a white man, how long? Black man would go to jail on average 13 years, white man 2 years. I go down the list of every single crime. So we set up a sentencing commission. We didn't set the time. Every single solitary maximum was reduced in there. But what happened was it became the same time for the same crime. So it said you have to serve between 1 and 3 years. It ended up becoming much lower. Black folks went to jail a lot less than they would have before, but it was a mistake.
Let me ask another follow-up on the crime bill. It also funded 100,000 police back in 1994. You've often said that more cops clearly mean less crime. Do you still believe that?
Yes, if in fact they're involved in community policing, not jump squads. For example, when we had community policing from the mid-90s on till Bush got elected, what happened? Violent crime actually went down precipitously. Remember the significant rise in violent crime that was occurring in the late 80s into the 90s. It went down, and fewer African Americans were arrested because you had the requirement. The cops didn't like it. They didn't like the community policing because you had to have 2 people in a vehicle. They had to get out of their cars. They had to introduce themselves to who owned the local liquor store, who owned the local grocery store, who was the woman on the corner. And what they would do, George, they'd actually go and give people their phone numbers. a cop would give the phone number. So if Nellie Smith was on the second floor where drug deals took place and things happened below her, her apartment, she could call and say, "It's Millie, and there's something going on here," and they'd never reveal it was her, because they know if she knew that in fact they'd never report the crime. She'd never report. So it actually started to come down. What happened? They eliminated the funding for community policing. Community policing doesn't mean more people coming in up-armored Humvees and swarming like that. When they did, it turned out that by the time we got to the late 90s and crime had come down so much, and the mayors and everybody asked the question, where do you want me to spend the money? They say, well, only 1% thought violent crime was a problem. It was as high as 22%.
Right now we have a systemic problem. How do you get the kind of policing, prevent the kind of policing?
You have to change the way in which they police. One of the things I'm going to do, George, is set up a national study group made up of cops, social workers, as well as made up of the black community and the brown community, to sit down in the White House and over the next year come up with significant reforms that need to take place within communities. You have to bring them together. One of the things I've observed is, the neighborhood I grew up in Claymont, either became a cop, a firefighter, or a priest. I wasn't qualified much to do any one of them. But here's the deal, all kidding aside, most cops don't like bad cops.
Correct.
They don't like it.
Correct.
And so what happens is they get intimidated into not reporting. So one of the things we do is there has to be transparency available. We have to be able to go in at the federal level, be able to go in and check out whether or not there's systematic problems within police departments. If in fact a cop needs to be tried, it's not the prosecutor in the community, in the district or there. You got to go outside the community to get another prosecutor to come in and handle the crime. There's a lot of things we've learned. And it takes time, but we can do this. You can ban chokeholds, but beyond that, you have to teach people how to de-escalate circumstances. De-escalate. So instead of anybody coming at you and the first thing you do is shoot to kill, you shoot them in the leg. There's ways you have to do more background checks in terms of whether or not the person coming in passes certain psychological tests. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm sorry because it was really, I think, really, really important, is you have to be in a position where you are able to identify the things that have to change. And one of the things that has to change is so many cops get called into circumstances where somebody is mentally off, like what happened not long ago with that guy with the knife. That's why we have to provide within police departments psychologists and social workers to go out with the cops on those calls, some of those 911 calls, to de-escalate the circumstance, to deal with talking them down. But we can't, cops are kind of like school teachers now. A school teacher has to know everything from how to handle hunger in a household as well as how to teach how to read. Well, cops don't have that breadth. And there's a lot of things we can do. We shouldn't be defunding cops. We should be mandating the things that we should be doing within police departments and make sure there's total transparency.
Got to take another quick break. We'll be right back.
I don't know that.
So ashamed to overpay for this used car, I've decided to go undercover. Guess I picked the wrong used car site.
Remember, if you don't see me, you're not seeing the most accurate price. Shop at Carfax. You won't have to overpay on a used car again.
Hey, Bob.
Oh, my. Hey, Beth, how we feeling?
Good.
Yep.
Moving.
Shop millions of great deals, all with a free Carfax report. Only at the all-new Carfax.com.
Cue Rachel Ray.
Hey, friends. Today we're whipping up some delicious recipes. So, who's hungry?
Pets love Rachel Ray Nutrish and its kitchen-inspired recipes with real meat, poultry, or fish. Rachel Ray Nutrish. Real recipes, real ingredients, real good.
Skip to cold relief fast. With Alka-Seltzer Plus Severe Power Fast Fizz. Dissolves quickly, instantly ready to start working. Oh, what a relief it is. So fast.
Fructis Sleek and Shine Anti-Frizz Serum.
This is no joke. It does keep that frizz away. It's not going to weigh your hair down. And it's also that nice, fruity, floral scent.
Fructis Sleek and Shine. No wonder it's #1 by Garnier. Naturally.
about my great-grandmother.
My grandma.
My cousin.
My great-great-grandmother. She was all of 4 feet 11, but very tenacious.
Very independent woman. Driven, passionate. Embodied grit, perseverance.
She marched.
She wrote. She demanded. She was proud to pass on legacy of civic-mindedness to her descendants. I'm very proud to carry on her story. Her story. Find their stories.
Make them count.
At Ancestry.
Thinking about your financial plan? So are we. Prudential helps 25 million people with their financial needs. With over 90 years of investment experience, our thousands of financial professionals can help. Go to Prudential.com or talk to an advisor.
Wow. I wish I could get a deal on a smartphone, but I'm not a new customer.
Well, actually, now new and existing customers can get our best smartphone deal. It's historic.
That is historic, which means I'm making history, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd exactly...
Wow, me, Dave Brown, existing customer who got the greatest deal in history.
Just like every other customer gets.
Oh, that's cool too.
It's not complicated. AT&T is making history. Everyone gets our best smartphone deals, including the latest pre-orders.
Ready to shine from the inside out? Try Nature's Bounty Hair, Skin, and Nails Gummies. The #1 brand to support beautiful hair, glowing skin, and healthy nails. And try Advanced, now with 2 times more biotin.
ABC Wednesday is the perfect night for the premiere of new comedy.
Who's living their best life?
With a 1-hour Goldbergs and their tribute to Airplane the movie.
I've developed a drinking problem.
The Connors are locked down in their new night.
Can I please have another serving of mashed potatoes? Thank you.
And Blackish is dressed for their Wednesday debut.
Look how handsome my baby is. You look like RuPaul out of drag.
New comedy premieres Wednesday, 8/7 Central on ABC.
Sachet Chante. Quality care is important for good health, and Buckeye's committed to quality care for our Medicaid members.
Buckeye's rewards help me buy the things I need.
They stood by me 100%.
Buckeye Health Plan, the care you need, the quality you deserve.
Nice. This is the new Buick?
I think you mean the new Alexa.
It's a Buick.
It's an Alexa? Check it out. Alexa, turn on the outdoor lights.
Okay. That's cool, but I'm pretty sure it's a Buick.
Clearly an Alexa. Alexa, get directions to the 818 grill.
Getting directions. It's a Buick.
First ever Buick Encore GX. Available with Alexa built-in.
Nice Buick.
So Alexa.
Now get nearly $3,300 purchase cash on the 2020 Encore GX. Ask Alexa, tell me about Buick SUVs.
Buckeye's quality care helps me keep my family healthy. Buckeye's quality care gives my family peace of mind.
Every person should experience Buckeye because you need that support there for you. Buckeye Health Plan, the care you need, the quality you deserve.
Gag and music from the Foo Fighters. Jimmy Kimmel Live, new tonight on ABC.
He shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint judges of the Supreme Court and all other officers of the United States. From the Constitution Center in Philadelphia, here again, George Stephanopoulos.
And the Supreme Court is our next topic. The questioner, Nathan Osborne of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Democrat.
Hi, I'm George, Mr. Vice President.
Hey, Nathan.
Our country's first Supreme Court gave its first rulings just 2 blocks from here, from 1791 to 1800, and it's become more polarized since then. Merrick Garland didn't get a hearing for all of 2016, and Amy Coney Barrett's being pushed through at the last minute, even though millions have already voted. So what do you think about ideas from people like Pete Buttigieg and others to put in place safeguards that will help ensure more long-term balance and stability? And what do you say to LGBTQ Americans and others who are very worried right now about erosions of their rights and our democracy as a whole?
Well, let me start the last point, work my way back. I think there's great reason to be concerned. I was on the road most of the time during these hearings, so I didn't hear many of them. I just got the recaps when I'd get in late at night. I've been going around the country, Florida, and anyway. And my reading online, what the judge said was she didn't answer very many questions at all. And I don't even think she has laid out much of a judicial philosophy in terms of the basis upon which she thinks are there unenumerated rights in the Constitution and the rest. So, number one. So I think there's great reason to be concerned for the LGBT community, something I've fought very hard for a long time to make sure there's equality across the board. Number two, I think that also healthcare overall is very much in jeopardy as a consequence of the president's going to go directly after this election, directly to the Supreme Court within a month to try to get Obamacare wiped out after 10 million people have already lost their insurance from their employer and wants to take 20 million people out of the system as well, plus 100 million people with pre-existing conditions. So there's a lot at stake. I don't think it's appropriate. I think the Constitution implies, there's no provision in the Constitution. My problem is I made a mistake of teaching constitutional law for 21 years and the separation of powers. The Constitution implies that the way the people have a right to determine who's going to be on the court is how they vote for their senators and their president, which seek the advice and consent of the Senate and the
president's president for all 4 years, isn't he?
No, he is. But once an election begins, by implication, it is inconsistent with the constitutional principles, in my view. You get disagreement among scholars on this. But I believe it's inconsistent when millions of people already voted to put someone on the court. I think it should have been held until this election is over, see what the makeup of the Senate is going to be. If the president wins this election, he should be able to.
How about that question of expanding the court? Here's what you said exactly 1 year ago tonight at a Democratic debate. You said, I would not get into court packing. I would not pack the court. That's not what you're saying now. Is the nomination of Judge Barrett reason enough to rethink your position?
What is the nomination? What I wanted to do, George, if I had answered the question directly, then all the focus would be on what's Biden going to do if he wins, instead of on, is it appropriate what is going on now? And it should stay, this is the thing that the president loves to do, always take our eye off the ball. What's at stake? One of the things Pete has suggested is, and there's a number of constitutional scholars have suggested as well, that there are at least 4 or 5 options that are available to determine whether or not you can change the way in which the court lifetime appointment takes place, consistent, arguably, with the Constitution. I have not been a fan of court packing because I think it just generates what will happen. Whoever wins, it just keeps moving in a way that is inconsistent with what is going to be manageable.
So you're still not a fan?
Well, I'm not a fan. I then say it depends on how this turns out. Not how he wins, but how it's handled. But there's a number of things that are going to be coming up, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about other alternatives as well.
What does that mean, how it's handled? How will that determine for
example, there's actually real live debate on the floor. If people are really going to be able to have a time to go through this, I don't know anybody who's gone on the floor and that's been a controversial justice in terms of fundamentally altering the makeup of the court that's gone through in a day kind of thing. I mean, it depends on how much they rush this. And you think about it, George. Here you got a lot of people not being able to pay their mortgage, not being able to put food on the table, not being able to keep their business open, not being able to do anything to deal with what's going on in terms of the economy as a consequence of COVID, and they have no time to deal with that, but they have time to rush this through.
Well, right now, it looks like they're going to have a vote around Halloween, so if they vote on it before the election, you are open to expanding the court?
I'm open to considering what happens from that point on.
You said so many times during the campaign, all through the course of your career, it's important to level with
It is, but George, if I say, no matter what answer I gave you, if I say it, that's the headline tomorrow. It won't be about what's going on now, the improper way they're proceeding.
But don't voters have a right to know where you stand?
They do have a right to know where I stand, and they'll have a right to know where I stand before they vote.
So you'll come out with a clear position before Election Day?
Yes, depending on how they handle this. But look, what you should do is you got to make sure you vote. And vote for a senator who, in fact, reflects your general view on constitutional interpretation. And vote for a president who is more in line with you. And if you oppose the position that I would not have appointed her, but if you oppose my position, vote for Trump. Vote for a Republican who shares that view. But that's your opportunity to get involved in lifetime appointments that presidents come and go. Justices stay and stay and stay.
We have a question from a Republican, Andrew Lewis. I guess a disaffected Republican. You cast a writing vote for John Kasich in 2016. You're going to vote against President Trump this year.
And John's writing in for me, by the way.
I know that. Mr. Vice President,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Vice President, my father, Drew Lewis, served as Secretary of Transportation under President Ronald Reagan in his first
Oh,
term.
yeah, I'll be darned.
And some of his closest allies and friends were Democrats, including House Speaker Tip O'Neill and Senator Ted Kennedy. Sadly, today we have highly partisan and dysfunctional governance, and I believe President Trump is primarily responsible for creating this toxic environment. As president, how will you avoid the temptation to exact revenge and instead take the high road and attempt to restore bipartisanship, civility, and honor to our democracy?
It's written by a fellow who won the Pulitzer Prize for a book he wrote about the presidency. He said, you know, I doubt whether Biden is really Irish. He doesn't hold a grudge. In politics, grudges don't work. They make no sense. I really mean it. I have never, and the second point I'd make is, everybody talks about, yeah, Joe, when you were a senator and a chairman of foreign relations or chairman of judiciary, you got a lot of things done. You're able to cross the aisle, but the days are changed. When you're vice president, you got a lot done, but it can't happen anymore. It can't. We got to change the nature of the way we deal with one another. And it starts off by the way your father was and Tip was and others. You don't question another man or woman's motive. You can question their judgment, but not their motive. We badly need an infrastructure bill. Well, what happens? I stand up and I say, you know, we need an infrastructure bill, Senator, but I tell you what, you're in the pocket of the cement industry. Well, let's see what we can do. You can't get anywhere. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. I learned that lesson a long time ago. I've never, even when it's obvious on its face what the motive is, stick to the subject and listen to the other guy. Listen. What I will be doing as if I'm elected president, the first thing, and not a joke, and you can ask if they tell you your dad's old friends on the Republican side. I'm going to pick up the phone and call them and say, let's get together. We got to figure out how we're going to move forward here. Because there's so many things we really do agree on. And with Trump out of the way, the vindictiveness of a president going after Republicans who don't do exactly what he says gets taken away. There's going to be, I promise you, between 4 and 8 Republican senators are going to be willing to move on things where there's bipartisan consensus. Last example I'll give you. You know, after after Trump had been elected, named the next president, wasn't sworn in yet, I've been working on a thing called a bill relating to cancer cures, okay? And it was called the Cancer Moonshot. And I worked with a number of Democrats and Republicans, and we had a bill that was about $9 billion that made significant increases in research and development on cancer alternatives, NIH, and particularly specific cancer initiatives. And we only had, at the time, I think it was 111 or 114, whatever it was, votes in the House. I don't hold the exact number. And we had fewer than 40 in the Senate. But after he was elected, I got those people together as vice president. We sat down and we worked it out. And we ended up getting it passed, 396 votes in the House and 94 votes in the Senate. And at the end of the day, because it had to do with the Biden Cancer Moonshot I've been working on, Mitch McConnell stood up, and I was presiding officer, and moved to name the bill after my deceased son, Bo, who had just died. So there are ways to bring this together.
But how about the question of political accountability? Is there some tension between that and bringing people together? You know, Robert Mueller laid out a lot of evidence of possible obstruction of justice by President Trump. What would a Biden Justice Department do with that evidence?
What the Biden Justice Department will do is let the Department of Justice be the Department of Justice. Let them make the judgments of who should be prosecuted. They are not my lawyers. They're not my personal lawyers.
So you're not going to rule it in or rule it out?
I'm not going to rule in or out. I'm going to hire really first-rate prosecutors and people who understand the law, like Democrat and Republican administrations have had, and let them make the judgment. But turning this into a vehicle for as if it's your own law firm, you don't own that Justice Department. You pick the best people you can, and you hope that what they're going to do is they're going to enforce the law as they see it. But can you remember any Republican president going out there, or former Democratic president, go find that guy and prosecute him? Ever hear that? Or, by the way, I'm being sued because a woman's accused me of rape. Represent me. Represent me. Personally represent me in the state of New York on my not allowing my tax returns. What's that all about? What is that about?
Got to take another break. We'll be right back.
The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term.
You fell asleep with your sign again.
Fell asleep with your sign again. No, I didn't.
Okay.
Switch to Progressive and you can save hundreds. You know, like the sign says.
Ready to take your immune support to the next level? Nature's Bounty is here for you. The #1 herbal supplement brand has everything you need to help keep your immune system strong. Immune support comes naturally with Nature's Bounty.
For skin as alive as you are, don't settle for silver. Gold Bond. Champion your skin.
What's inside Airborne? A blast of immune support and the confidence to take on the day. That's why Airborne is the only #1 pharmacist recommended immune support brand. Airborne, your daily dose of confidence.
Ever get the feeling you're being watched? Maybe you are. Hackers can steal what's on your device or see what you send over Wi-Fi, like your financial info. That's why Norton 360 includes a VPN for online privacy, device security, and more. Keep prying eyes out. Go to norton.com/privacy.
Who was John Lennon?
Magical, brilliant, daring. Rebel, a working class kid from Liverpool.
John was my favorite Beatle. If he hadn't dreamed so beautifully, it wouldn't hurt so much.
Now, Friday night, new interviews with those who were right there with John Lennon and his last interview, all on that day.
Wow, there's life, there's hope.
The 2020 event.
Yoko said, what I tell you now is top secret. You can't ever tell anyone.
John Lennon, his life, his legacy, his last days. Friday night on ABC.
Sure this is the right place? Damn it. We're overheated. Lock the doors. What? We're fine.
Dad?
What's going on?
It's Danielle. She and her sister never showed.
Hello?
Cody Hoyt.
Speaking. You're looking for a couple of missing teenagers.
Such a feeling's coming over me.
The girls aren't the first. What do you mean? We have the occasional young female bandit around here. 12 missing females within a 100-mile radius of where we're sitting. We got ourselves a predicament.
I did some digging. There's a possible connection to truck stops.
What are the odds?
We give out ads and that sort of thing.
It can be the Wild West out here.
So we just sit and wait.
No, we do not wait.
Race or impact.
From the Constitution Center in Philadelphia, here again, George Stephanopoulos.
And welcome back to our town hall with former Vice President Joe Biden. We're going to look at the environment right now. We're going to get a question from Michelle Ellison from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a businesswoman, a social worker. You're a Republican who's voted for Democrats, but you're not sure what you're going to do this time around. Correct?
Correct. Greetings, former Vice President Biden.
Hello.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott. In a 2012 report of the University of Pittsburgh's Institute of Politics, fracking was discussed and its possible implications for the waterways from the Commonwealth to the Gulf. Fracking has made the population sick and killed wildlife in southwest Pennsylvania. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and small business development centers have already begun to transition people away from fossil fuels. What industries that are not harmful to human health and the environment are you planning for southwest Pennsylvania and the nation?
Well, first of all, I make it clear I do not propose banning fracking. I think you have to make sure that fracking is in fact not emitting methane or polluting the well or dealing with what can be small earthquakes and how they're drilling. So it has to be managed very, very well, number one. Number two, what we have to do is the future rests in renewable energy. The single fastest growing energy source in the world right now, because I'm going to say something that's going to sound self-serving, but I managed the Recovery Act, and I was able to invest billions of dollars into bringing down the cost per BTU of wind and solar. So now it's cheaper than coal, it's cheaper than oil right now, and it has great, great promise. And it's also the fastest growing employer in the energy industry. And so there are a number of things that I would do immediately. Number one, there are well over 100,000 wells that are left uncapped in the region. We could hire 128,000 of these people who are working in the industry to cap these wells and get a good salary doing it now, number one. Number two, we should be moving toward finding the new technologies that are going to be able to deal with carbon capture. So ultimately, as a transition, we moved to a net zero emission of carbon, that we're still going to be able to use, if we find the right technology, some gas to be able to, if we can carbon capture. And I think we're going to be able to move in a direction where by the year 2035, we'll be able to have net zero emissions of carbon from the creation of energy creation. That so we can move it by dealing with those. And every time we talk about global warming or the environment, the president thinks it's a joke, and I think it's jobs. Because what we're going to have happen is, you'll be able to see now, as I started to say before, I as president is going to invest that $600 billion we spend in government contracts only on those things that in fact also are not only made in America, but building an infrastructure that's clean and new. And what we have to do is focus on the transmission of energy across the country from areas relating to solar and wind. The reason is that that has not been mastered yet. I've met a lot of people in Silicon Valley. The battery technology is increasing significantly, so you're going to be able to have, for example, solar on your home and a battery the size this by this, as I'm showing you here, in your basement. So when the sun doesn't shine for 5 days, you still have enough energy. So we're making significant progress. The other thing we're going to do is provide an awful lot of work. It's estimated to put close to 1 million people to work by weatherizing 4 million buildings and 2 million homes, because we'll save tons and tons of energy, or like billions of barrels of energy over time, and at the same time provide significant employment and a good union wages, prevailing wages.
Let me stick on fracking for a second. You said you don't want to ban fracking. As you know, it's an important issue here in Pennsylvania. Not everyone buys your denial. A member of the Boilermakers Local 154, Sean Stepney, was quoted in the New York Times today saying, "You can't have it both ways." It says you can't meet your goal to end fossil fuels without ending fracking. What do you say to people like Sean who doubt your denial because they think you want to keep that promise?
Tell them the Boilermakers overwhelmingly endorsed me, okay? So the Boilermakers Union has endorsed me because I sat down with them and in great detail with the leadership exactly what I would do, number one. Number two, what I would do is I would stop giving tax breaks and subsidizing oil. We don't need to subsidize oil any longer, number one. We should stop that.